Welcome to 5 Minute Bible, your daily guide for your daily reading. Today's April the 2nd, and we'll be looking at Judges 8 through 9. Now, yesterday we saw that God delivers through weakness so that the victory clearly belongs to Him. Today we're going to see what happens after the victory. And Judges 8 through 9 forces us to confront a new and unsettling reality. The problem is no longer just the people. It begins to show up in the deliverance itself. What happens as a triumph begins to unravel, not because God has failed, but because the human heart remains unchanged. And these chapters move us from victory into decline and from deliverance into disorder. And they show us even God-appointed leaders are not immune to corruption. In that way, Judges 8 begins with Gideon completing his victory over Midian. There's tension with the tribe of Ephraim, but it's diffused through careful and strategic words. And Gideon continues pursuing the remaining enemy kings, and he secures the full victory. And he brings the conflict to a decisive end. And on the surface, everything seems to be resolved. The enemy is defeated. The land is at peace, and the deliverer stands vindicated. But what follows begins to complicate that picture tremendously because the people ask Gideon to rule over them, effectively offering him a dynastic kingship. Gideon refuses with the right words, declaring that the Lord will rule over Israel. Sounds great. And yet his actions begin to move in a different direction. He gathers gold from the people, and then he fashions an ephod, which becomes an object of false worship. What begins as a symbol connected to victory becomes a snare that leads Israel back into idolatry right after God just delivered them in such a mighty way. Then, after Gideon's death, the decline accelerates. The people quickly abandon the Lord and return to the Baals, showing how shallow their previous faithfulness had really been. Then Judges 9 introduces Abimelech, Gideon's son, who takes what Gideon would not formally claim, and he seizes power by murdering his brothers, establishing himself as king, and rules through violence and manipulation. By the way, if you're looking for a trivia question, who was the first king of Israel? If you would say Abimelech, you would be right, not Saul. Abimelech set himself up as temporary king. He seizes power, and his reign is marked by instability, betrayal, and bloodshed, and it ends in a humiliating judgment that exposes the emptiness of his own authority. The chapter then closes by showing that God repays wickedness, bringing justice upon both Abimelech and all those who supported him. Now, as you read today, I want you to ask the following question. What happens when victory is followed by compromise? Instead of continued faithfulness, Joshua 8 through 9 shows us that success does not secure obedience. If the heart is not anchored in the Lord, even the highest moments can give way to the deepest corruptions. And that way, the tension in these chapters is the danger of post-victory decline. But it goes deeper than simply backsliding. Gideon is not introduced as a failure. He is a man used powerfully by God. He's used to be a deliverer who brings real victory to the people of Israel. And yet, he doesn't finish his life well. His refusal of the kingship sounds faithful, but his actions quietly contradict his words. And then the ephod he creates becomes a focal point of idolatrous worship in the camp, because what appears small begins to redirect the people away from the Lord in long-term patterns. And that reveals something deeply sobering, because the greatest dangers often come after our biggest successes. When vigilance fades and subtle compromises begin to take root, it is not always the open rebellion that leads to ruin. It's often the small little distortions that seem manageable in the moment, but grow over time into something truly destructive. By the time we reach Abimelech, those distortions have matured into outright corruption. Leadership is no longer connected to God's calling, but to personal ambition. Power is seized and not given. Authority is maintained through violence instead of righteousness. What began as people struggling with faithfulness has now become a people who have been shaped by brokenness. And the deliverer has given way to the tyrant, and the result is chaos. Judges, in that way, is showing us that when God's rule is obscured or replaced, disorder is not far behind. And in that way, these chapters sharpen the need for a true and a righteous king. Gideon, though used by God, could not carry the weight of leadership without distorting it. Abimelech reveals the opposite extreme. He's this self-appointed ruler who embodies everything that leadership should not be. And together, they form a contrast that exposes the insufficiency of human rule apart from God's holy standard. You're either going to have the tyrant or you're going to have the pacifist. Either way, they both lead to ruin. Christ in that way comes as the king that the book of Judges is quietly demanding. He doesn't refuse kingship only to imitate it imperfectly, and he doesn't seize power through violence or ambition. He is openly declared as king and exercises that authority with perfect righteousness, wisdom, and justice, and holiness, and goodness, and truth. Where Gideon's legacy leads to idolatry and Abimelech's legacy leads to destruction, Christ establishes a kingdom that is going to restore what is broken. And unlike every single leader in the book of Judges, Christ's reign does not collapse under pressure or drift into idolatry. His rule is stable, it's enduring, and it's transformative. And he does not merely interpret the cycles of sin, he subdues them, and he reshapes his people and extends his dominion over every enemy until everything will be placed underneath his holy feet. So, as you read Judges 8 through 9 today, I want you to see how quickly victory gives way to compromise and how dangerous leadership becomes when it's disconnected from Yahweh. Tomorrow, we're going to see the cycle is going to continue. The pattern is going to grow darker as both sin and deliverance are going to take on new and troubling forms. And with that, read your Bible carefully, devotionally, and joyfully, and may the Lord use his word to sanctify you completely, and we will continue our journey tomorrow. God bless you.